Hi, this is me and my assistant Joshua. We're building a guitar, right Josh?
Yes.
We building it for Tim Pratt?
Yes.
Alright, this is the status of Tim Pratt's guitar. It goes pretty quickly from here because the difficult work is mostly done. The neck setting is very time consuming typically, but I do like a pre-fitting and it helps the neck setting go faster. And basically what I've got here, is we talked about it before, is I've got a dovetail joint in there. And if you remember, the way I did it was I cut the block prior to putting it in, and then I make sure everything's square and stuff like that, and then I cut out the material around the block, and then I've pre-cut this dovetail on the neck. I'll show you the tools I use. Is just starting with my handsaw. I mark it. I have my bevel gauge here, and I set it to the 1:8 ratio, to the 9-degree ratio. And then I just use it to mark everything. And then I cut it as well as I can with my little handsaw. What happens when you get it all ready to go in there is you use a little shim to really wedge it against one side. But those of you who make guitars will be surprised at how tight and accurate I can get this dovetail just with my saw and chisels and like that. You typically want to leave room for the shim a little bit, but you don't really have to mean to do that. The joint is usually not all that accurate when you finish, even when you do it with a machine, and then you put a shim to wedge it against one side. But you can see here that this is a very tight fit. Doesn't really hardly move at all. And this taper here, there's just barely a little room in the bottom for my fitting. So what I'm going to do is just wedge the shim over on the bottom of this side, because there's really not much room for it once it's against the back. The other two things I do on pre-fitting is I take a look at the center seam and I hold it on the center seam and I go up the neck to see with my 24-inch straight edge here and see how straight I am to the middle. And man, that is so close. I'll just take a tiny shave of material off this side. Actually, if I even wedge it in a little further, I bet you that's about, yeah, so accurate. It needs very, very little adjustment. Like, frankly, when it's that close, I'll have to see how it measures onto the bridge, but it's pretty close. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll just give it one touch and hopefully not overshoot it. But at this point, when it's that close, I'm going to need to final shape this heel block here before I make any further adjustments, because that may knock it a little bit to one side or the other as I take this outer material off. I have the channel cut for the truss rod here. I have a truss rod which is threaded on one end. I cut it to length and I take a die and I thread the other end just the amount that I want the bolt to go onto it, and then I put some crazy glue on there and put the bolt on there. And then what I do is I put wax on the truss rod itself. I melt some candle wax on there, and then I take a 3mm trash bag and do 2 wraps on the whole thing and then melt it on there. The wax is so that the vibration dampener of the trash bag will be able to slide on there if needs be, so it won't get stuck. And then that trash bag, like I say, keeps it from vibrating a little, rattling a little bit, making an audible sound. Then, like I say, I mash the hardwood strip onto there, and then I plane it down on the fingerboard, and then the truss rod adjusts with a nut on the top. The way it works is it's angled in there where it goes deeper on this side. And the reason that it works is because, like, if you had that truss rod in there at this kind of angle, when it's compressed, it's going to go like this and give it a back bow to counteract the pull of the string. Now, if it was this way, then it would hinge, you know, back this way, and it would cause, you know, the kind of relief that the string will bring. So, say hi, Penny.
Hi.
Okay. And on this guitar, we did the top, we secured the top to the rim with rubber bands in the mold. And then the way I've come to do it on the back is I have these spool clamps that I've made out of large dowel and carriage bolts. You know, I put it on the side of the guitar like this and clamp it down, and then I have, you know, a series of these around the body, and that seems to give me more uniform clamping pressure and a better attachment to the rim. Because with my old rubber band method on the back, sometimes I would get little, you know, imperfect joints, so I'd have to go back and reclamp those and stuff like that. Sometimes I still need to do that. But the way I check is once I've got it glued on, I just go around the body, a blow, and make sure that there's nowhere where the air is going through. So I just make sure I've got a good joint all around. The final seal is when I put the binding on, but I want to make sure that there's no air leaks other than that, because this body, this air chamber, we want it to blow air out, and we want it to be completely airtight around the instrument. So you can see on this one, when I tap the bridge plate, it's got a loud, sonorous sound. And I blow in there, I can see that the air comes right out. So this is a nice, airtight chamber here, and it should sound great. So now what I have to do is put the binding on. I have a bridge here too that I made. I made a little bit wider nut slot than I sometimes do. Reason being is I want to make sure that I have room to compensate on that saddle if there's any problem with the intonation. And I do this bridge actually a little bit custom and different than the way Gibson did it. I do a precise radius on the bridge for the same radius as the fretboard, and for me, that seems to work out better. I do leave a little bit more mass on the bass side, but for the most part I try to follow the radius exactly, with a little heavier action over on the treble side. And for me it works great. It allows me to see how high the action is across the board and make a, you know, meaningful adjustment on the bridge. And this is East Indian rosewood. It's a little bit brighter and louder, and since we have the thicker top, I think that's better than the ebony for this particular one. That's where we're at. We're gonna call it a day for the status update, and I'm gonna keep on working, and hopefully I'll get this thing done soon. Thanks, Tim. Bye. Good morning. I wanted to show the progress from last night. I'm back at work. Here it is, 6:15. I finished late last night, and I would have liked to have done more, but these guitars need a lot. Tim, if I had done a classical the way that you'd asked, there would have been several steps which would have been omitted. Actually, there's a lot more that goes into this type of steel string guitar. The classical guitar would have had a simpler bracing pattern, and strictly speaking would have had both a flat top and a flat back, which would have saved a lot of brace radiusing even on the more limited bracing. And it would not have had a truss rod in the neck, and I know that I talked about that, but I'm going to show you a little bit about what that is. This is just a piece of mild steel rod, which we've threaded here on this end, and then also cut a limited number of threads on this end, which go into this barrel bolt. Now, the way that this guitar was built by Gibson, they cut this trench all the way through and then counterbored a hole here in the end and put a screw in there, put a bolt in there to hold it fast, but it's got a kind of a narrow dovetail. So when I started doing it, this is the first one of this particular model I made, and I wanted to make it historically accurate. I kind of threatened the dovetail as I was coming into there. And it might have been like a better order of operations to drill this hole and then cut the dovetail around it and stuff, but it's kind of micro thin on the sides. I wasn't too into it once I got started. So I went ahead and did it the way a J45 is done, which is you drill a 3/8 inch hole here into the heel, and then this barrel bolt, which is also a piece of rod which is cut out, you cut a hole in it and then tap that hole, you know, for threads, and then put this here, and then, you know, this slides in there. I don't want to push it too far because I got some more work to do on this truss rod. And basically what happens, like I say, is if this neck over relieves, then you tighten this bolt, and then it creates some back bow in this neck, so it counteracts the tension of the strings. And a lot of work for that privilege, but it saves you from, you know, a neck reset like on a guitar that does not have a truss rod. But we did it. Now what I have to do on this truss rod, before I can close it up, let's see if I can get this out of here, is I take wax, candle wax, and melt it onto the truss rod. Then I take like a 3 mil garbage bag, which I use as a heat shrink tube, and I wrap it in here, and then I take heat and seal it on. And what happens is I have a sleeve on there that's very tight, but it could also kind of, the rod can move inside. Then I stick it in, and I put a filler strip of this precise width and mash it in there so it keeps this truss rod from rattling inside the neck. And then I cut it flush with a saw, then I plane it flat. I've made my fingerboard here, so this is all precisely tapered. This is exactly the right width at the nut here for this type of neck. I've inlaid it with little white mother of pearls and did the fretting. You can see this is a radius. This is another step that would have been omitted if we had a classical guitar. It's just a flat. But this, I've, with my block plane, started the radius, and then I take a precisely radius sanding block and make it be 12 foot radius here. You know, like if you had a circle with a 12-foot radius, this would be this portion of it. And then of course we got the frets in, and I've taken all the rough edges off them and done a little roll on the ends of the fingerboard so it's comfortable. And that is going to be the neck. I also just have to do a peg head overlay here, which is a very thin piece of material that goes on top, mainly cosmetic. It doesn't provide much structure. But this is all the right dimension here, and this neck is almost ready to set. And like, as we know, just the dry fit in there is almost right already, both on this measurement and on the side to side. So the neck set should be pretty painless, minor adjustment. Excuse me. The body here, we've done a lot. We're almost ready to go. We've done the binding. You can see it's very clean. I'm really wanting to get this done, so I just made sure that I did very accurate sized binding ledges, so I didn't have to do a lot of scraping and fittings. It's just about the right height and just about the right height here, so I'm just going to do a little bit of scraping with a metal scraper, and then I'll do some sanding. And then I'll sand in here, and I'll be a little bit aggressive on the edges just to thin them out a little bit so the instrument will be more responsive, but it's pretty good so far for this type of guitar. So there's that, and giving you the update of my work yesterday. Hope you find it interesting.